She was standing at the front door with one bag. Not two, not three. One. The same worn leather bag she had arrived with 4 years ago. Back when the twins were too small to reach the kitchen counter. Back when this house still smelled like grief and formula and silence. Now it smelled like Chanel No. 5 and fresh-cut roses that someone else had chosen. The little boy was at the top of the staircase, gripping the banister with both hands, his knuckles white, his eyes red. He hadn't cried yet. He was 7 years old, and he had already learned, in the quiet, devastating way that children of wealthy households learn things, that crying in front of his father was not something that changed outcomes. His sister sat on the bottom step, arms wrapped around her knees, face turned toward the door. Toward Celeste. Neither of them spoke. And Celeste, who had sung them to sleep in 2 languages, who had pressed cool cloths on their foreheads through fevers, who had held their small hands at their mother's funeral because their father was too broken to stand. Celeste stood at that door and did not move. Not because she was waiting for permission, but because she was waiting to understand how the truth had managed to lose so completely. From somewhere deep in the house, Raphael Kane's voice cut through the silence like something cold and final. "The car is outside, Celeste. I think it's best you go now." And just like that, 4 years disappeared. But not the way you think. Stay with me. Because what happened in that house in the 72 hours before this moment will change the way you think about trust, about loyalty, and about the terrifying power of a lie delivered by someone wearing love as a costume. Celeste Ward had not planned to become a nanny. She had studied early childhood development at university, had spent 2 years working with at-risk youth in a community center in Baltimore, and had imagined her life moving toward something structured, a classroom, a curriculum, a path she could map. But plans have a way of bending when grief enters a room uninvited. Her mother had fallen ill in the winter of what should have been Celeste's most ambitious year, and the medical bills had quietly swallowed every plan she had ever made. A friend of a friend had mentioned a position, a widower in Connecticut, a man who had lost his wife 8 months prior to a rare cardiac event, who had 7-year-old twins that a rotating series of professional caregivers had failed to connect with. The agency had called it a difficult household. What they meant was a house full of love that didn't know where to go anymore. Celeste had driven herself to the interview on a Tuesday morning in March, through light snow and wet roads, and had found Raphael Kane standing in the doorway of a 17-room estate looking like a man who was functioning entirely on discipline and nothing else. He was tall, controlled, the kind of handsome that had probably stopped mattering to him years ago. He had asked her 4 questions, formal, direct, efficient. And then a small girl had appeared from behind his leg, wide dark eyes, hair in 2 uneven braids that someone had attempted and abandoned, and had looked up at Celeste and said, with complete seriousness, "Do you know how to make the kind of eggs that don't have the runny part?" And Celeste had laughed, a real, warm, startled laugh, and the little girl had smiled for the first time, and Raphael Kane had cleared his throat in the way that men clear their throats when something has moved them, and they do not intend to admit it. She had started the following Monday. Within 3 months, Isla and Theo Kane had stopped being sad children. They were still children who had lost their mother. That grief did not leave. It simply found a different room to live in, a quieter one, the kind they could visit when they needed to and leave when they were ready. Celeste had learned that about grief. She had learned it from her own mother's illness, from the way pain does not disappear but simply waits for you to build something strong enough to carry it. She read to them every night. Different books for each. Theo loved stories about explorers and maps and things with teeth. Isla loved anything where an ordinary person discovered they were braver than they thought. Celeste kept notes in a small journal, not for the Kanes, not for any agency, but for herself. Little observations. Theo is afraid of the dark but will not say so. Isla apologizes for things that are not her fault. Both of them watch the door when they hear their father's car in the driveway. That last one had taken her time to understand. Raphael Kane was not a cold man. He was a careful one. He had loved his wife, Claire, with the kind of completeness that leaves a person strangely hollow when it is gone, not empty, exactly, but rearranged. He worked because working gave the hours a shape. He was present on weekends in the measured, responsible way of a man who understood his role, but was still learning how to fill it naturally. He trusted Celeste completely. That was the part that would matter later. He had told her about the safe exactly once. It was a Sunday afternoon in October, 14 months into her time with the family. The twins were in the garden with the groundskeeper, hunting for the last of the season's caterpillars. Raphael had called Celeste into his private study, a room she had been in perhaps twice before, always briefly, always with purpose. He had stood by the window with his hands in his pockets, looking out at the garden where his children were laughing at something small and alive in Theo's palm, and he had spoken without turning around. "There is a safe behind the painting on the left wall," he said. "The combination is in the household binder, in an envelope marked emergency only. I want you to know about it because the envelope inside contains something important, something Claire wrote before she passed." Celeste had waited. "It is a letter," he continued, "her last one, written for Isla and Theo. She asked that they receive it on their 18th birthday, not before." A pause. "I am telling you this because I trust you more than anyone in this house, and because Claire—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "Claire would have trusted you too," he said. "That is all." He had never spoken of it again. Celeste had never touched the safe. Some things, she understood instinctively, were not hers to carry. They were simply hers to protect. Serena Voss arrived in the Kane household the way beautiful trouble always arrives, gradually, and then all at once. She had met Raphael at a charity event in the spring of Celeste's 3rd year with the family. She was 41, elegant in the specific way of women who have studied elegance the way others study law. And she wore her intelligence like a second skin, visible enough to impress, concealed enough to disarm. Raphael had introduced her to the twins on a Saturday morning 4 months after they began seeing each other. He had been nervous in a way Celeste had never seen him nervous before, adjusting his watch, standing slightly too straight, watching Serena's face with something between hope and calculation. Isla had shaken her hand politely. Theo had stared at her for a long moment and then turned to Celeste and said, too loudly, "Her smile doesn't go to her eyes." Raphael had apologized, visibly mortified. Celeste had said nothing, but she had thought, children are the most honest instruments we have. Over the following months, Serena became a regular presence in the house. She was perfectly appropriate with the twins, not warm, but appropriate. She brought them gifts they liked and forgot to look at. She complimented their drawings without looking at them. With Celeste, she was unfailingly polite. Which is to say, she was careful. The carefulness was what Celeste noticed first. Not hostility, not competition, simply the precise, practiced politeness of a woman who was measuring something. "What are you adding up?" Celeste had thought once, catching Serena's gaze over the twins' heads at dinner. "What are you calculating?" She had told herself she was imagining it. She had not been imagining it. The night everything began to unravel was a Wednesday. Raphael was in London for 3 days, a business trip he had mentioned twice and confirmed once, the kind of absence that had become routine and manageable. Celeste had the twins on a schedule: homework, dinner, bath, reading, bed. The house was quiet by 8:30, the good kind of quiet. She was in the kitchen at 9:15, making tea, when Marin, the head housekeeper, a reserved woman in her 60s who had been with the Kanes for a decade, appeared in the doorway looking unsettled. "Miss Serena is here," Marin said. "She let herself in with her key. She says Mr. Kane asked her to check on the house. Celeste set down her cup. He didn't mention that to me. No, said Marin, and then after a pause she went upstairs. Celeste had gone upstairs. Serena was in the hallway outside Raphael's study, standing at the door, not going in, simply standing. When she heard Celeste's footsteps, she turned with the fluidity of someone who had planned for exactly this, and smiled. I didn't mean to disturb the quiet, she said. Raphael wanted me to pick up some paperwork from his desk. He would have called me about that, Celeste said, calm, even. Serena's smile didn't change. He forgot, you know how he is. They stood in the hallway for a moment that lasted longer than its seconds. The study is locked, Celeste said. I don't have access to his private desk. You'd need to call him. Of course, said Serena. You're right, I'll call him in the morning. She left within 20 minutes. And Celeste stood in the hallway for a long time afterward, looking at the closed door of the study, feeling the specific chill of a woman who knows something is wrong but cannot yet name what. Raphael returned from London on a Friday afternoon. He seemed lighter than when he left, something in his eyes, a loosening of the particular tension he carried in his jaw. He played with the twins for an hour in the garden, genuinely, fully present in the way he sometimes managed to be, and that always made Celeste feel quietly hopeful for all of them. That evening, after the twins were in bed, he called Celeste into the sitting room. He was holding something. A photograph, printed on plain paper, the kind of image you take on a phone and print urgently without care for quality. He placed it on the coffee table between them and did not speak. Celeste looked at it. It was the front page of a tabloid website, the kind that trafficked in wealthy family scandals, photographed through long lenses and written in the breathless language of people who confused exposure with truth. The headline read, Caine Family Secrets. Billionaire widow's final letter leaked, what she really wanted for her children. And below it, photographed in fragments, blurred at the edges but unmistakably real, were portions of a handwritten letter. Claire Kane's handwriting. From the safe. Celeste felt the room tilt. She looked up at Raphael. His face was a controlled catastrophe, the kind of expression a man makes when he has already decided what he believes, but is giving the other person one final chance to change it. The safe was opened 3 days ago, he said, Wednesday night. I checked the log this morning. There is a digital record on the lock mechanism. A breath. You and Marin are the only people in this house with access to the emergency binder where the combination is stored. Raphael. Marin has been with this family for 10 years, he said. Quiet, devastating, she has no reason. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Celeste had ever heard. I didn't open that safe, she said. I have never opened that safe, not once in 4 years. Then how did someone get the letter? I don't know, but it wasn't me. He looked at her for a long, long moment, and in that moment she saw every version of the conversation they were about to have, the accusations she would not be able to disprove, the logic that would not bend in her favor, the way truth becomes powerless when the architecture of circumstance has already been built against it. I need time to think, he said. I think it's best if you take leave, she said, before he could. Because she would not let him see her beg, not because she was proud, but because she understood in the marrow of her that some dignities are not given back once surrendered. Yes, he said, just for now, until I understand more. She nodded. She went upstairs and told the twins she was going to visit family for a little while. Isla had looked at her with eyes that were far too old for 7 and said, You're coming back, though. And Celeste had held the child's face in both hands and said, I am going to do everything I can. Which was the most honest thing she could say. Before we go any further into this story, I need to take just a moment. If this is your first time here, welcome. Welcome to Nanny Gray Stories channel. This is a place built for people who understand that the most important stories are never the ones on the surface. They live underneath, in the quiet rooms, in the choices made in the dark, in the people no one thinks to protect. We tell stories about betrayal, about broken trust, about the people who hold families together while being treated as invisible. And we tell them until the truth comes out. If you feel like you belong here, you do. Subscribe to Nanny Grace Stories, not because we ask, but because you deserve to be in the room when justice arrives. Now back to Celeste, because the truth is only just beginning to surface. She stayed in a small hotel 40 minutes from the estate. She had packed for 3 days and stayed for 11. She did not call Raphael. She would not chase her own innocence. She had learned early in life that desperation never convinces people who have already half decided. It only confirms their doubt. She sat with herself instead. She reviewed every moment of that Wednesday night with the precision of a woman building a case, not out of strategy, but out of survival. Serena had been at the house. Serena had been in the hallway outside the study. Serena had said Raphael forgot to call. Raphael who forgot nothing. The problem was that Celeste had nothing concrete. No camera in that hallway. No proof of anything except Serena's presence and a feeling in the body that had never once led her wrong. But feelings were not evidence. And in houses like Raphael Kane's, feelings without evidence were just noise. On the 4th day, she received a call from Douglas Hart, Raphael's personal attorney and one of his oldest friends. She had met him perhaps 5 times. He was a meticulous man, deliberate in the way of people who had spent careers understanding that words, once released, could not be recalled. "I'm not calling in any official capacity," he said. "I want to be clear about that." "Understood," said Celeste. "I want to ask you one question. And I want you to know that whatever you tell me, I am going to believe you." Something in her chest released just slightly, just enough. "Ask it," she said. "Did you know what was in that letter? Before any of this happened, did you know what Claire had written?" Celeste thought carefully. "Mr. Kane told me it was a letter for the children, to be read at 18. He told me nothing of the contents." A long pause. "Then you don't know," Douglas said quietly. "You don't know what Claire wrote about you." The world went perfectly still. "What did she write?" Celeste asked. Douglas took a slow breath. "Claire wrote extensively about the kind of woman she hoped would care for her children in her absence," he said. "She described specific qualities, patience, warmth, the ability to love without condition, and then she named you Celeste, by name. She had done research after Raphael mentioned the agency. She had found you, read about your work, and written to Raphael that if anything happened to her, she hoped he would find you and ask you to care for Isla and Theo." Celeste sat down on the edge of the hotel bed. "She also wrote," Douglas continued, "that in the event of Raphael's remarriage, she asked that the children's primary caregiver, whoever held that role at the time, be consulted before any changes were made to their care structure, that their stability and emotional continuity should be legally protected within the trust conditions." The silence stretched. "If Serena married Raphael," Celeste said slowly, "she would not be able to remove you without triggering a legal review of the children's welfare," Douglas confirmed. "Claire built it in quietly. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply protective. And if the letter were destroyed or discredited, those protections would be far more difficult to enforce," he said, "especially if the letter's integrity had already been compromised by a public leak." Celeste closed her eyes. There it was. The architecture of it, the patience of it. Serena had not acted out of jealousy over a nanny. She had acted out of calculation. The cold, precise calculation of a woman removing a legal obstacle before it could stand in her way. "Raphael doesn't know this," Celeste said. "Raphael knows portions of the letter, not the full context. The tabloid published fragments, carefully chosen fragments. The sections about you and the trust conditions were not published. They were kept. Kept. Leverage, said Douglas simply, or insurance, I'm not yet certain which. Douglas had come to his own suspicions through a different path. He had been quietly reviewing the safe's digital access log, something Raphael had shared with him as part of addressing the leak legally, and something had not added up. The log showed the safe accessed on Wednesday at 9:47 in the evening, but the digital record also showed something that Raphael, in his pain, had not yet examined closely. The access had been made using a code entered manually. Not the code from the household emergency binder. A different code entirely. A code that had been programmed into the safe's secondary access protocol, quietly, professionally, without disturbing the primary record, sometime in the previous 60 days. Someone had installed a backdoor entry into that safe. That was not something a nanny accomplished with a household binder. That was something that required time, access, and a very specific kind of knowledge. I need you to understand something, Celeste, Douglas said. This is going to require patience, because what I have is suggestive but not yet complete, and Raphael is in love with her, Celeste said. Yes. Which means the truth has to be undeniable. It cannot leave him room to choose doubt. Yes, said Douglas. Then find me undeniable, she said. Back at the estate, the 11 days of Celeste's absence had left a particular kind of wreckage. Theo had stopped eating his breakfast properly, the small, specific kind of protest that children stage when they cannot articulate the larger grievance. He was eating, technically, but without the enthusiasm that Celeste had spent months building into the morning routine, the small rituals of warmth that make a meal a moment rather than a function. Isla had taken to sleeping with the light on. Raphael noticed both things. He was not unaware, but he was a man standing at the intersection of two terrible possibilities, that the woman he had trusted completely had betrayed him, or that the woman he was beginning to love was something he could not yet face. Serena had moved into the role of household organizer with the fluency of someone who had been rehearsing. She had opinions about the twins' schedule, about the new nanny who had been brought in temporarily, a pleasant, professional woman named Tilda who the twins were unfailingly polite to and clearly felt nothing for, about the layout of the kitchen, the timing of dinners, the flower arrangements in the entry hall. She was not cruel. She was simply replacing. And she was doing it with the speed of someone who understood that the window of replacement was narrow. Marin, the housekeeper, watched all of this from the careful distance of a woman who has worked in wealthy households long enough to understand that observation is the only form of power available to her. She had said nothing to Raphael, but she had begun to feel things she could not name, small inconsistencies, moments that didn't track, questions she didn't know how to ask. The question that haunted her most was simple. She had not given anyone the safe combination. She had not touched the emergency binder in months, and yet the combination had been used. Where had it come from? She did not yet know that it hadn't been used at all. On the 8th day of Celeste's absence, Theo had asked his father a question at the dinner table. "Dad," he said, the careful tone of a 7-year-old who had thought about this for a long time, "did Celeste do something bad?" Raphael had set down his fork. "Why do you ask?" "Because bad people don't read to you for 4 years, Theo said, "and they don't remember which part of the story you fell asleep at." Isla had been watching her father with those old, careful eyes. Raphael had not answered, but something in him had shifted, the barely perceptible movement of a foundation, reconsidering itself under pressure it has been pretending not to feel. Douglas found his undeniable proof on the 13th day. He had gone to a digital forensics firm, quietly, privately, using his own funds, without telling Raphael, and given them access to everything the safe's manufacturer had been willing to share once Douglas had explained the legal stakes. What they found was precise and irreversible. The secondary access code had been programmed into the safe system, using a device connected to the safe's internal Bluetooth interface. A device that had to have been within 3 feet of the safe to sync. The sync had occurred on a Sunday evening, 6 weeks before the letter was taken, at a time when Raphael had been in the city at a dinner event, when Serena had been at the house, when Celeste had not been in the building. She had taken the twins to her sister's for the afternoon and stayed for dinner, something Raphael had approved and which 3 separate text messages confirmed. There was more. The tabloid that had published the fragments had a known liaison, a contact who brokered between sources and editors, a woman who worked under a pseudonym and accepted payment in cryptocurrency. Douglas, through a contact of his own who worked in media law, had spent 4 days quietly tracing the payment chain. It did not lead directly to Serena. It led to a shell company. But the shell company had been registered 11 months ago, and the registered address was an office building in Manhattan. The 3rd floor of that building housed the private wealth management firm of Serena Voss. Douglas placed everything, the forensic report, the payment trail, the timeline comparison, the phone records showing Serena at the estate on the night of the Bluetooth sync, into a folder. Then he called Raphael. "I need you to come to my office," he said, "alone, and I need you to be prepared for something that is going to be very difficult to hear." The meeting lasted 2 hours. No one who was not in that room knew what was said exactly. Douglas had documented it as he documented everything. What was known, what mattered, was the shape of the man who left the office afterward. Raphael Kane walked to his car and sat in it for 22 minutes without starting the engine. His assistant later said she had seen him from the window. She said he had placed both hands flat on the steering wheel and looked at nothing, and that in 20 years of working with powerful men, she had never seen one look so precisely like something inside him was being dismantled and rebuilt simultaneously. He called Celeste at 4:17 in the afternoon. She answered on the 2nd ring. He said nothing for a moment, and then, "I am so sorry." 3 words, but not small ones. The kind of words that cost something real to say, that require a man to stand in the full weight of his own failure and not flinch. "I know," she said. "I should have, Celeste, I should have." "I know," she said again, steady. "But that is not what matters right now. What matters is Isla and Theo, and the truth being where they can find it when they're ready." He had asked her to come back. She had not answered immediately. Not out of cruelty, but because she needed him to understand, truly understand, that her return was not a given. That trust, once fractured in this particular way, did not simply reassemble because the facts had been corrected. It had to be rebuilt, slowly, with intention. "I understand," he said, and it was the most unguarded thing she had heard him say in 4 years. "I'll come back for the children," she said, "and then we will see." Serena Voss left the estate on a Saturday morning. Celeste did not witness it. She had chosen not to be there, not out of satisfaction, but out of the quiet understanding that some endings do not need witnesses to be complete. They simply need to be over. What she did witness was this. She arrived at the front door at 2 in the afternoon, and Theo appeared at the top of the staircase, the way he had appeared when she left, hands on the banister, face tight with the effort of not feeling too much. Except this time he let himself feel it. He came down those stairs at a speed that his father would have called alarming, and he wrapped both arms around Celeste's waist and said, muffled into her shoulder, "I knew you didn't do it. I told Dad." "I know you did, baby," she said. "I know." Isla appeared at his shoulder, quieter. She took Celeste's hand in both of hers, looked up at her, and said with the devastating simplicity of a child who has processed something enormous and come out the other side, "She's gone now." "Yes," said Celeste. "Good," said Isla. And in the entry hall of that 17-room house, on an autumn afternoon with leaves pressing against the tall windows, Raphael Caine stood at the edge of the room, not joining, not directing, simply being present. And for the first time in 4 years, he looked not like a man who was functioning on discipline alone. He looked like a man who understood, finally, what he had almost lost. Not a nanny. A witness. The person who had known his children best. The person his late wife had chosen, across time and circumstance, to name. He would spend a long time earning back what those weeks had cost. Celeste would let him try. Not because she had forgotten, but because Isla and Theo deserved to live in a house where adults chose repair over pride. And because Claire Caine had trusted her to stay. So she stayed. There is a postscript to this story that deserves to be told quietly. 3 weeks after her return, Celeste sat down with Raphael in the study with the safe, the room she had never entered without purpose. And he opened the safe himself and removed the letter and read her the parts that had never been published. She sat across from him and listened to Claire's voice arrive through her husband's, careful and warm and precise and brave, describing the kind of woman she hoped would hold her children's hands. Describing Celeste. When he finished, he folded the letter with the same care his wife had used to write it and placed it back inside. She knew, he said. She was their mother, Celeste said. Of course she knew. He nodded, and they sat for a while in the quiet of the room, 2 people carrying the weight and the grace of a woman neither of them would ever stop missing, and both of them were grateful for the silence. Outside from the garden, they could hear the twins arguing about something small and urgent, the way children argue when they are safe enough to bother. It was the best sound in the world. Some people don't enter your life to love you. They enter to reveal what and who you cannot afford to lose. Some wounds don't disappear just because someone says sorry. Raphael said it, and he meant it, but meaning it and earning it are 2 entirely different journeys, and Celeste knew the difference. Think about that for a moment. If you were Celeste, after 4 years of loyalty, after being publicly doubted, after watching the man you served almost choose comfort over truth, would you have walked back through that door? Or would loving those children from a distance have been the only way to protect what was left of yourself? There is no easy answer. That is why I'm asking. I'm reading every comment. If this story reached something in you, if you've ever been the person who was doubted when you deserved to be defended, if you've ever held your dignity in one hand while everything else fell, then you already know why this channel exists. Nanny Gray Stories is not just a place for stories. It is a place for everyone who has ever needed the truth to win. Subscribe, so that every time we find a story worth telling, a story about loyalty, about betrayal, about the people who hold families together in silence, you are right here when it arrives. Like this video if Celeste deserved better, and leave a comment with your answer. I promise you I will be there. Until next time, trust wisely, love carefully, and never let anyone silence the truth that lives inside you. This is Nanny Gray Stories.